wear many hats. So in the back we have our associate provost doing the camera work for us. Actually have to be chairman of the Department for Radio and Television. Yes. I want to just welcome everybody here this evening. My name is Larry Patterson. I am the former project manager for the BLMI, which is where my heart is always. Thank you everybody for coming. Good evening, friends, and good evening, friends of BLMI and the NAACP and invited guests. This evening is made possible through the generosity of our Associate Provost, Mr. Stuart McClellan, and our Director, Mr. Cole Sinclair. Without the two of them, this would not be possible. So I want to thank them first and foremost. We would like to welcome you to Brooklyn College tonight for an evening with the Black and Latino Male Initiative in collaboration with the NAACP at Brooklyn College and the Department of Sociology in a panel discussion about mass incarceration, the presumption of innocence, education behind bars, and life after incarceration. This most important event is produced by Mr. Floyd Jarvis, one of our BLMI ambassadors. He will be graduating with a BA in Africana Studies and also has a background in history, political science, and social justice. He has done work with the JustleadershipUSA and the Working Families Party and Hudson Link for higher education in prisons. I just have to take a minute and say that I met Floyd not too long ago, after his returning back to Brooklyn College, but his reputation had preceded him. I had heard about Floyd through several of his professors that he had been in connection with, had classes with prior to him getting here, and they all, really spoke about how dynamic this young man was, and the great things that he was going to do. So when I actually got a chance to meet him, obviously I was glad to meet him, but then the acceleration of his involvement and passion, and the way that he really started to get things done was really very extraordinary. So I'm really honored to know him, even though it's been a short time, but I know that he's on his way to do great things, which is why all of you in this room tonight. So at this time I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Jarvis, and he's going to give a brief overview of tonight's topic. And we have a lot of people in the room, and we have some heavy hitters in the room, so I'm going to be using that word brief a lot, because we unfortunately are constrained by time, and I just want to make sure that everybody gets their their allotted time, so that you can get as much information as possible. So Floyd, could you come and
You need the mic.
All right. Thank you for joining the Black and Latino Male Initiative here at Brooklyn College and at NAACP. For our this will be a ongoing series. We looked at a whole another one before. Yes, we looked at a whole another one in the fall of 2016. Right? I'm about to say 17. We're here to talk about mass incarceration. Right now, we are in the era of decarceration. And we're coming out of the era of mass incarceration. Joining me on the panel, we have my good friend Everton Wagstaffe. He was fully exonerated. He was forced to serve 23 years in New York State unjustly for a crime that he did not commit. And I'm glad to have him here because I think that deserves a second round. My good brother Khalil, come coordinator at Greene Correctional with Hudson Link for Higher Education in Prison. And it's a college program ran throughout New York State. I'm an alumni from Hudson Link myself. And we have my good friend, my main man, Ronald Sylvestre. He is a staff attorney, criminal defense attorney for the Legal Aid Society. By the time we finish here, everyone will learn how they can affect change and help to end mass incarceration. And we welcome you into this era of incarceration.
Okay, folks, so we're going to try to get this this evening going. We are going to start with Mr. Khalil Cumberbatch. And the first thing that we'd like to know is, how did we as a nation arrive at this age of mass incarceration? More specifically, the effects of the '94 Omnibus Bill, AKA the Bill Clinton, that is, crime bill, and its effect on communities of color. And can you speak on that as an expert? Thank you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? Yes, everyone in the back, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you. First, I think it's worthy to say thank you to the organizers and to Floyd for not only pulling this together, but being really thoughtful in how you include the voices of those who've been directly impacted. I think that is a key part of the movement to decarcerate America, is that, you know, we can't have any more about us without us, right? And the organization that I work for was founded on the premise that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but yet farthest from resources and power to make change. And if we are going to reach the tipping point of decarceration, we must include the voices of those who've been directly impacted by mass incarceration, including their families and community members. So I just want to say thank you to Floyd. How much time do I have to answer that question? I feel like I need like 3 hours.
We're going to give you about 10 minutes, and if you go over, since you got a beautiful family here, we might give you a couple more minutes.
So I think it's important for us first to place the context that what we now have is like this bloated system of mass incarceration with, we've all heard the numbers, 2.3 billion people in the world, 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's jail population, 2.7 million children with some parent incarcerated or some form of criminal justice involvement, 65 million people with a criminal record on file somewhere in a repository across the country. We've all heard those numbers, but I think it's important for us to place it in the context that we did not get here by mistake. First, we must understand that this is not a train that flew off the tracks and, oh my God, wow, look what happened, look where we're at. Because if you believe that, you know, I have a bridge that I'm selling in Brooklyn really cheap, maybe someone would be interested. But how we got here was that, you know, we've criminalized, in many cases, being poor. We've criminalized having a mental illness. We've criminalized suffering from addiction. We've criminalized being black and brown. Let me just say that again. We've criminalized being black and brown. Just walking down the street, you can get stopped and questioned and frisked just because of your skin color, primarily. But also the deeper question that I'm hearing is, why do we as a country, why are we so addicted to punishment? That we must always find some other group to criminalize, and now we see, you know, it's anyone who claims the faith of Islam, right? And or it's someone who may not be born in this country. But we as a country have always found a way to criminalize other people, and more importantly, criminalize their behavior. So that's like kind of big picture. In terms of the 1994 crime bill, it's interesting that you said Bill. A lot of people would also say Hillary. Sorry for Hillary supporters. But I mean, let's just look at let's just look at the numbers before, before that bill actually got into some traction. I mean, we were looking at a little bit less than about 700,000 people in jail in periods. So that's the federal and state systems. And then what you saw in the 1994 crime bill was this idea that punishment was the way to actually solve socioeconomic issues in predominantly communities of color and or low-income communities. And so what that meant was that, quality of life crimes, right, like those terms and super predators and other derogatory terms were placed on people of color to criminalize them and to criminalize their behavior. In conjunction with that, what we now know as welfare was completely reformed around the same time, and there was a huge emphasis placed on personal responsibility. As a matter of fact, that was like almost the wording of the actual bill itself. So when you have people who are being criminalized because they live in a certain neighborhood because of certain socioeconomic conditions in that neighborhood, and then the only major safety net that they have is being taken away from them with the understanding that you're not working hard enough. That's why you're suffering. And if you just pull yourself up out of bootstrap and do what you need to do, everything will be fine. A combination of that in conjunction with there being a spike in the availability of illegal drugs, what is a person actually to do? Now look at someone growing up in South Jamaica, Queens, the neighborhood where I grew up at. Heavily policed, schools are underfunded, there's a bunch of socioeconomic issues that exist in that community. And then, so if I'm a young man, now my mother can't get welfare or food assistance or cash assistance because you're saying that now she needs to work. And although she's working for less than minimum wage, she can't actually take time off to go apply for a real job to actually get living wage. And here I am as a young male with limited options. I'm young, right? So like my age is at this point something that's holding me back from getting like full-time employment. On top of the fact that I'm required to be in school at a certain time. But then there's like this completely attractive illicit drug trade that is like making people thousands of dollars in days. So now I had the lesser of two evils to choose from, but nevertheless it's two evils, right? So all of that looks very appealing to me. So it's not far-fetched to see why someone would actually want to actually do that. And then I would add that from my experience of being incarcerated, because for those who don't know, yes, I'm a lecturer at Columbia, yes, I work at this amazing organization called JustleadershipUSA, but I also served 6.5 years in the New York State prison system. And for me, that's the reason why I'm the expert up here, is because of my lived experience. So anyone that I've ever met in prison that was serving time for selling drugs didn't want to sell drugs. They actually wished that they could have done something else. They knew that they had the ability, the skills, the wherewithal, the ingenuity to actually do something else. But they were given two evils to choose from. And when you choose, in the end, you're still choosing an evil. So if I had to answer that very concisely, hopefully I did that. One, we can't lose sight of the fact that we didn't get here by happenstance, right? The system that we have now called criminal justice was not something that just broke all of a sudden. It was faulty from the beginning. It was sold to us, packaged really well, but they knew what was going to happen. And two, that the 1994 crime bill, now we all know, and to some extent, the people who pushed it the hardest actually said that it had some consequences that they didn't see, whether you believe that or not. But in the end, everyone agrees that that was not a good moment for us as a country, but more specifically for people who live in certain communities.
I'm going to salute you because I'm from South Jamaica, Queens.
It's important to know that the bill isn't what's called the 94 Crime Control Omnibus Bill. Now, in criminal justice, you have two viewpoints or two ends of the spectrum. You have process upholds the rights of the accused. Due process feels that you are innocent until proven guilty by a jury of your peers in the court of law. Crime control does not subscribe to that model. Crime control feels that crime control feels that the arrested are guilty and deserve punishment. Due process feels that the arrested are supposed to be given due process. They uphold the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments. Crime control feels that these amendments, in order to uphold these amendments, they cost too much money, and it's quicker and easier to incarcerate this person. So, the particular wording of the '94 crime control bill, off the jump, once it says crime control, you know where they're going. They don't uphold the Bill of Rights. They want to mass incarcerate, as it were.
Thanks, Larry. We're going to, I have a question for Mr. Wagstaffe. Can you, again, briefly, as hard as that may be, and I know that's going to be a challenge, but basically talk about your experience. We want to speak about the coercion, your journey and your quest for freedom. Give you some latitude.
Well, first, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. Thank you, Larry, for having me. As this brother just said, being poor or illiterate or educated is somewhat, it shouldn't be a crime, but my experience have shown me that it can be a crime and it is used as a crime against me. Because when I was first actually arrested, I pretty much didn't know anything about the judicial system. I couldn't even speak the English language here because I just came from Jamaica, so pretty much I have to actually, when I got locked up, I have to pretty much start off in ABE and, educate myself, all the way up. I mean, I don't want to use these things as an excuse not to do anything for myself, because just because I came here and I didn't have that education doesn't mean, or it didn't mean I should have stayed here, ignorant of everything and just allow the system to do whatever they want with me. In my case, I didn't do any of that. I pretty much enrolled in my class inside that school system, and I pretty much educate myself all the way, write my own motion and everything and so forth and so on. So let's reverse this up a bit here. Let's start how this was all this started. I was arrested on the assumption that by this detective that we committed a crime with two other guys, kidnapped this young girl. She was found later on, found nude on the street and everything. I was, already said they have an eyewitness who saw me and this other man pull this girl in a car. A few hours later, she was found murdered and so forth and so on. The detective said I was picked by, on the 2nd of January, I was ID'd by this witness. While I was doing incarceration, I know I did not commit a crime, and I started to fight. I didn't pretty much have any legal assistance or anything yet, as I said, because I was appointed lawyer. So I started, to fight my case and, try to prove that I did not commit my crime. Over the years, I discovered a report that the police actually fabricated the whole case against me and my co-defendant. It shows that these detectives started an investigation on us a day before they ever had an eyewitness. So pretty much, there was no probable cause to arrest me in the first place or anything like that. It was just pretty much orchestrated by the detective. And as a result, I had to spend over 23 years in prison for a crime I did not commit. But as I said to you earlier, I did not sit and complain or throw in the pity party or anything like that. I know what I had to do. I educate myself, and I did everything possible. I think one of the things that shocked these prosecutors or the system was that they thought I was going to just sit there and just take it like that and just, and that was it. And I found that even when, to be honest, when I refused to go to the parole board when my parole board came up, because the parole board, and my sense is that it is there for people who have committed a crime. I did not commit a crime to be put to the parole board in the first place, so as a result, I did not go to the board. And then I could have been released 5 years early, and when my conditional release came up, I refused to sign the conditional release paper, because had I signed the conditional release paper, I would have been subjected to register as a sex offender. In other words, they would have to dictate to me when to go to bed, where to hang up, and who to talk to, and all these things. And I know I could not, under any circumstances, subject myself to such condition. My thing is, no one of integrity or principle would have or should subject himself to such condition. So I know at the time that I did not really have any resource, but I know I had one thing on my side, and I had the truth. I know the prosecutor have all the resources they could ever have, everything imaginable, but my thing was, I know I did not commit this crime. I know I'm going to clear myself. I know I will be vindicated somewhere down the line. And I did not give up hope, not one bit. Of course, yes, I get a little bump here and there on the way, but I just pick myself up and just keep going. And I just keep fighting. So just because we may find ourselves in a certain situation, not having an education, it does not give us the right not to educate ourselves. We have it within us to educate ourselves to the fullest. I don't care who you are or where you're from. You can make it happen, because when my experience is a prime example. That it does this, everything is dependent upon you to do something for yourself. Everything. You don't have to don't get up every day and blame the system or blame that. I'm not saying the system does not create measures, as this brother says and everybody says, to put us in certain circumstances, but at the same time, we have the ability to fight and rise above it. We can do that. And I have done that, and I have proven that. As a result, I'm here with you guys as a free man. You know?
Sister, you got to follow that, but you're good. This is Torriente? Torriente. Forgive me. Please talk about your advocacy work with Hudson Link for higher education in prison.
Okay, so hi again, my name is Klarisse. I'm the academic coordinator for Greene Correctional Facility in beautiful Coxsackie, New York. Very north of here. So with Hudson Link, we started as, there was this trend in the early 90s of kind of attacking groups of people, and in the early 90s, you used to be able, and historically, there were college programs in prison across the United States, but I believe in 94, 95, that was repealed. They took the Pell Grant. So what pays for a lot of people to go to school today, the Pell Grant, they took that away from the incarcerated population. So to combat that, Hudson Link was started at its Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Austin, in New York. Higher education is the #1 deterrent to recidivism. Education is the #1 deterrent to recidivism. These programs are very, 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 very important. At Greene, we run a program, and same as the programs in the other facilities, we do pre-college and college. We meet our students where they are at, and we do not discriminate against crimes. We don't discriminate against age or sentencing or whatnot. We accept all students. With my position, I run the program at Greene, but I also have gotten heavily, heavily immersed in lobbying for reinstating TAP and Pell, for also ban that box, take them off the applications. I mean, CUNY schools don't have that. You have to check in order if you've been convicted of a felony before. But in the rest of the schools, SUNY schools still have it, and that is, a major deterrent for returning citizens. You've already done your time. That's our thought. I think that, and personally, and you guys can have your own opinions, is that there's this huge distrust of the justice system. We are continuing and continuing and continuing to perpetuate incarceration post-release. Why do we have to make this so hard? We know that if there's not access to these resources, how are individuals supposed to contribute to their communities? How are they supposed to reintegrate into their lives, raise children, do the positive thing, do the right thing? We are Hudson Link, for instance. We are at Greene, we are at Sing Sing, we're at Taconic, we're at Sullivan, and Bedford is another program. Yeah, but we work in a consortium too. There's also the Bard Prison Project as well. So there's certain colleges and universities across this state of New York that have kind of band together and figure out how are we going to teach the incarcerated population, the inside, and make it as congruent to traditional college. There's so many things that don't make sense when it comes to prison-related services. I'm not going to go into a lot of them because I can lose my job, but I will say that, you know, it's hard to teach someone how to research without, you know, even an intranet, not even an internet, an intranet. You know, teaching people how to think critically. A lot of my students, you know, not a lot of them, but a great deal of them haven't been in school since the 90s. Maybe would have had dropped out of school, never read a book. So, but we don't want to deny them access to education because again, and I'm going to say it for the third time in a row, education is the #1 deterrent to recidivism. We want to make sure that we're engaging them. And also when they come out, we're not going to leave them high and dry. We're going to make sure that they understand how to fill out that FAFSA. Hudson Link provides them with a soup, a laptop, and engages them with other community resources depending on where they are. And for those who are returning to the city, they have a wealth of resources. But my brothers and sisters that are going to Buffalo, to Rochester, back to Syracuse, hanging high in Newburgh, they don't have that much. They don't have that much. So it's really, you know, creating this network of people that are boots on the ground that are willing to serve, and further adapting that and making sure that this ends. So our goal is to get into as many facilities as possible. You know, when it comes to activism, making sure that we're lobbying. Everybody in here, vote, 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 vote locally. You know, not just for president.
Yes.
Pick those legislators out,
Yes.
those assemblymen, those senators, they're the ones making the decisions. And it's your job to talk to them if you don't like something that's going on. Excuse my French, but don't bitch and complain at home, because that's not going to do anything. So that's something that I've become very passionate. The agency supports me as to why I'm here today, as well. And I guess that I hope does that answer your question. Okay.
Yes. The taking away the again, we go back to the 94 crime control bill. It had a lot of teeth. One of those teeth was the taking away of Pell Grants for the incarcerated. For and anybody remember Jadakiss song Why?
Yeah.
He makes mention of this. I forgot the exact line.
You know,
Yeah. But anyway, part of the team was they took away the Pell Grants for the incarcerated. So now a lot of brothers were forced and sisters, what they had to do was sign up and pay for correspondence courses. Now it's very difficult to pay for correspondence courses when the max you're making is 24 cents an hour. Right? Yeah, 24 cents an hour. So Hudson Link was started by a gentleman that was also formerly incarcerated, Sean Peter, and it's a nonprofit organization that was started to facilitate the education. As I said, I'm an alumni of Hudson Link, and it did wonders for me whilst I was incarcerated. And right, the college that I was a part of was Siena College in Latino, New York, and what they do is their sister school here, downtown Brooklyn, St. Francis. If you're coming back to New York City, bring your credits from Siena, and you can go to St. Francis. But I'm here for the college. Yeah, so I just wanted to harken back to 94 Crime Bill as to why Hudson Link had to be started, as to why the incarcerated can't receive
Mr. Sylvestre, you're the last, but you're obviously not the least. We're saving the best for last. Can you talk a bit about representing indigent persons and the work of the Legal Aid Society? What does it mean to be truly free from excessive bail?
Again, so my name is Ron Sylvestre. I've been with the Legal Aid Society for about 3 years.
It takes a special kind of passion to represent indigent people, right? Folks who've been accused of crimes, who have no one else to look at for help, because there's a judge who doesn't want to end up in the paper by letting you go. There's a prosecutor who wants to get their name in the spotlight off your back. So it takes a lot of passion, working with the person for the first time, explaining to them, I'm your person. I'm the person who represent you throughout this whole process. So it's wonderful work. Legal Aid Society is the main provider in New York City for public defense. We represent people who don't make above a certain threshold. It's wonderful work. And as to bail, bail is probably one of the biggest factor in determining how a case is going to go. If you come through in your arraignment and bail is set, you know, that means you're incarcerated during the pendency of your case. And essentially, if you don't have the money to pay bail because you're poor, that's why we represent you in the first place, and you're kind of stuck in jail while your case is pending. And a lot of people. And ultimately, what the prosecutors want sometimes is they don't want you to do jail time. They're not asking for jail time. They just want you to have a record, right? So they'll say, prosecution recommending time served. In order to get the time served, you have to plead to the misdemeanor in which you're incarcerated for. So, I mean, it's the biggest struggle. Bail, the arraignment, is probably one of the biggest fights we have. We have to go in there guns a-blazing. We have to, if we can, talk to your family, talk to witnesses if possible, so we can make a very detailed bail argument. Because if you're in, your case is going to go a completely different way. A lot of people who want to fight their case, who are incarcerated while the case is pending, is saying, wait, I can get out if I just say I did it. So many people just take that option. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to go home? So a lot of people do that, and bail is completely oppressive. Furthermore, with bail, one of the agencies that have a factor is called the Criminal Justice Agency. What they do is they interview people before they see the judge, right? So what they do is they talk to you, they ask you questions. One of the things that they consider in determining your score, if you're a high risk of returning or not returning to court, is they'll ask you, you expect family to come, for example. And that's one of the most ridiculous factors, because if you weren't given an opportunity to make phone calls, how could your family come? And that's a factor that goes to your score. If you have a low score, that's one of the reasons the judge might decide to set bail. Also, for example, prior warrant history. So let's say I'm a 40-year-old guy. When I was in my 20s, I picked up a lot of cases. I didn't come to court a lot. I had a big warrant history. I haven't come back to court a lot. That never goes away, by the way. So if you have a court case, please go, because that never goes away. And if you ever have a warrant history, it doesn't matter if it's 10 years old, it still appears, and that's a factor in why the judge won't release you with your current case. Another factor that they consider is if you're currently working. It is extremely hard to keep solid employment in New York City. We all know that. It's extremely hard. So if you're not working, another reason we'd be representing you, obviously because you're not making enough funds, that's a factor that can be held against you. So there are all these little factors that basically attack people with low income, right? If you're not working, we're going to set bail on you, because that makes sense, right? Actually, it's the opposite. If you don't expect family to come because you don't come from a great, let's say, family situation where your mom kicked you out, your dad wasn't around, then who do you expect to come for you at your arraignment? And these are all factors that really are opposite of the way they should think about bail. But bail is just, it's an oppressive system. It's oppressive how they use that to keep you in, to make you take pleas, to up your status.
Mr. Jarvis, I would like to ask you a question. How did you get all of these heavy hitters at the table?
Okay. before I answer that, I believe Janelle Quarles from the Working Families Party is here, and she is going to speak to us about a bill concerning bail reform. So we can see how you can help.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I don't need a mic, right? So my name is Janelle Klarisse. I am the New York Legislative Campaigns Manager for New York Working Families, and we are a political organization that seeks to elect actual progressives to municipal and state level government, so that way we can spend our political capital to actually pass the progressive policies that we want to see passed. So I guess on the other side of the coin to the bail reform issue is the speedy trial issue. It's a constitutional right that we're supposed to, get due process and right to a speedy trial, except that it unfortunately does not work out that way here in New York State, as we very well know. So there's currently a bill in the State Assembly and the Senate that seeks to close that loophole that forces defendants to endure significant delays before trial. So essentially what it does is that it ties prosecutorial readiness to discovery. So in other words, once the prosecutor declares that they're ready, they have to hand over all the discovery documents to the defense to actually be ready, and then from that point, the clock starts ticking. Because we can't have, you guys very well know, we can't have folks languishing in jail for months, years at a time, awaiting trial, sitting there. We're all innocent until proven guilty, right? Just like, not brought up on any charges. That's just ridiculous. It's thinking about our brother, maybe rest in power, Tony Browder, who was, at Rikers for 3 years, sat in solitary for at least one of those years, right? 2. It's just, we gotta close that gap. So to that end, on June 8th, we are going to have an Albany Lobby Day, like the wonderful sister so eloquently put it. It's an opportunity to tell your state legislators, like, hey, listen, now is the time to close that gap so that we can actually ensure that folks, are in and out, they're not awaiting trial forever and ever and ever in perpetuity. So it's an opportunity to tell our legislators that, frankly, we are criminal justice reform voters. We're looking for bail reform and speedy trial and other things that sort of encompass sort of that comprehensive criminal justice reform packaging, right? And frankly, this is an election year. 2016, folks in the Senate and the Assembly are looking to be reelected, right? So we gotta tell them, if you don't vote right on our issues, guess what's gonna happen to you in September and November in the primary, if you're being primary, or in the general election in November, right? So, we know that the elected officials tend to respond to that sort of thing. So I'm gonna leave my cards with all my information on it for folks who are interested to go up to Albany for the day, to get your voices heard and let them know, again, criminal justice voters, wrap it up, let's go. And it's also, June 8th is 1 week before the session ends, so it's, it's prime time. So hope some of you join me. If you're personally affected, whether it's you or a family member or a community member, that personal touch definitely goes a long way. So, thank you for your time.
I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Pamela. She's a community organizer for our Close Rikers campaign. So it was mentioned earlier that Just Leadership USA, not only do we have this big overall arching goal of cutting the U.S. correctional population in half by the year 2030, but also here locally, how we plan to achieve that is by focusing our efforts on closing Rikers Island. And so, how many of you have not heard of Rikers Island? Because you can never assume my daughter is Good. She's so cute. That is hilarious. So we talk about the effects of like the 1994 crime bill and this idea of like punishing people, but also specifically harshly punishing people who have violent crimes, right? People who've been charged or convicted of violent crimes, right? And actually the name of the bill was the Violent Crime and Control Act. So it was like they were being very specific in who they were targeting. So trickled down to like 2010, right? When, or was it 2011 when Khalil Browder like enters into the system, right? And I should also mention that while Khalil is like the ultimate tragic story that's being told, the president himself says his name, there are many other Khalils, men and women, who have suffered the same exact plight that Khalil suffered, and still suffer. So our campaign is to close Rikers Island because we believe that Rikers Island cannot be reformed. And so the common question is, well, what are you going to do with all the bad people? And that's like a common question that people always ask, what are you going to do about all the bad people? So a couple things. One is that we need to keep in mind that 85% of people on Rikers Island actually have never been convicted of a crime. More personally, I should tell you that at some point I was considered one of those bad people. And now I'm here talking to you, right? You're not scared. I hope you're not. And so this idea of like innocent until proven guilty has to be upheld and has to be maintained. But ironically, sometimes, even in our own communities, that doesn't apply. How many times have you heard someone who says, well, he was caught, and the police are saying they did it, yeah, he did it. And if he didn't do that, he did something else. I've seen him that one time. It happens in our own communities. So when we talk about culture shift and changing the perception of people who are directly impacted, it's not just like a us versus them thing. We'd be foolish to think that. Sometimes the toughest conversations are to have at a dining room table. When your family member says something ludicrous and you're like, wait a minute, that is just extremely sexist, extremely racist, or whatever. But speedy trial is what kind of like made me think about this, right? So speedy trial is a way that the fact that Khalil's case went on for 3 years and in the end the case was dropped was largely because of this lack of any type of enforcement on this issue of speedy trial. That he went to court about 13 times, and every time he went to court, the DA would say something like, we're not ready, witnesses, we can't get a hold of this person, and it never counted towards the DA's readiness. So not only was like his constitutional rights violated, but every time he went back to Rikers, his human rights were violated. And then the other issue is bail, right? So like,
does everybody know what happened in the end to Browder? Can you please explain?
So Khalil Browder was 16 when he went into the system, which speaks to a larger issue, right? New York State is one of 2 states in this country. Only the other one is North Carolina. Anybody from North Carolina? All right. I don't know how many times we want to be compared to like North Carolina. Right? I'm just saying that for a state that touts itself as one of the most progressive states in the world, potentially, you know, exactly, depending on who you ask. That we're still one of 2 states that say that we can charge a 16-year-old as an adult. We know all of the physiological science that comes with, you know, with maturation and brain development and so on and so forth. So Khalil was 16, entered into the system, and anyone who stepped on Rikers Island, like the other day I had a question, somebody was like, well, you know, what makes Rikers so different than any other jail? And I'm like, have you ever been to Rikers? And he said no. I said, okay, well, let's just stop right there. Because when you step foot on Rikers, you already know. It doesn't have to be told to you. It doesn't have to be explained to you. Your lawyer doesn't have to tell you. The DA doesn't have to tell you. Correctional officers don't have to tell you. You just know that you have entered into a place where you have to become one of 2 things, either the predator or the prey. And it is very difficult to be neither. So Khalil entered into that system as a 16-year-old boy who was falsely accused of stealing a backpack, which I should say was considered to be a violent crime. He went up in front of a judge for consideration of bail, and because he had this prior history of involvement in the justice system, in the fact that he had gotten a summons and at some point didn't respond to it, and then it was a warrant out for him, he was held. His bail was $3,000. Now, when you're poor, $3,000 may as well be $3 million. And he languished on Rikers Island because of speedy trial, because of the fact that he was 16 and we're one of 2 states that still can charge him as an adult, because of the fact that like this dependence on monetary bail, because there are other forms of bail that judges can take into consideration, but this keen focus on monetary bail held him in like limbo. And then of course the conditions on Rikers Island are like horrendous. They don't take anybody's humanity into consideration. And any video that you see of Khalil starting a fight, because that's the video that they love to show, you know, that was well after his time on Rikers Island, after he had already been conditioned to live in a culture of violence, which, you know, U.S. Attorney General Preet Bharara said himself that after his thorough investigation of Rikers Island, that there is a deeply rooted culture of violence, which means that instead of talking about things, instead of communicating about how frustrated you are, you actually just punch somebody in the face. And in many times that's insinuated and encouraged and turned a blind eye to by correctional staff. So, you know, Khalil, after surviving this system, and ultimately it was deemed that he was innocent, that actually all charges were dropped. He didn't have to plead out, as it was mentioned earlier. All charges were dropped, he was released, and he did the best he could to regain some normality, some sense of normalcy in his life. He was enrolled in BCC. Everyone that knew him said he was one of the best students that they ever had. He was working really hard as an advocate. He had done a ton of interviews about his experience. But all of that did not help him deal and cope with the trauma that comes with incarceration, but more specifically that comes with an exposure to Rikers Island for an extended period of time. All because he couldn't make bail. Because had his bail, had the judge said, you know what, you can just be released on ROR, he wouldn't have had to endure that. And ultimately, he took his life. Took his own life. That was not his first attempt. And I do not say that to disgrace his name, but I say that to say that we all know when someone commits suicide, that is a clear sign of some deep-seated trauma that has not been fully addressed or treated. So not only was he like struggling with living life, but also, you know, he was like always asked to kind of like relive his trauma. And this is something that I always talk about, which is like trauma picking, right? Like, yes, it's really great to have somebody share their story, but afterwards, is somebody checking in with this brother or sister? Is somebody saying, are you all right? And if you need to talk, I got 30 minutes, let's talk. Because he was constantly asked to pimp his trauma, and he did it in the sake of this movement, but in the end, every time he had to tell that story, he was reliving that trauma, and if anyone has any experience with, you know, trauma-related symptoms, to constantly relive the moment keeps you stuck there, and that's how you get post-traumatic stress syndrome. When you're constantly living in that moment where you can't distinguish the fact that you're actually outside of that moment. So I say all that to say that when people ask us at Just Leadership USA, when Pam does her work, and when Glenn Martin, who's like the founder of our organization, he who himself is formerly incarcerated, been on Rikers Island twice. When people ask us why Rikers Island, like we have to seriously ask ourselves, why Rikers Island? Like why is it that we live in one of the most rich countries in cities in the world, and we have something as despicable and disgusting and dehumanizing as a Rikers Island, where so much attention is paid on Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, when the reality is that those same exact conditions are existent in Queens, in New York City, that we all are collectively responsible for. If you pay taxes, that is your tax money being invested into that decrepit system at the tune of $167,000 per bed per year. And that is a conservative estimate. If you factor in some other factors, it's actually well over $200,000 per bed per year. Now, to put that in context, a 4-year degree at Harvard is about $120,000. 4 years. 1 year we're spending that money and it's not working. So when someone asks us like, what are, like, how does the 1994 crime bill actually impact us? We're seeing it. Cases like Khalil and every other case, that goes unmentioned, that is just like his, is some of the trickling effects of, this infamous crime. Thank you.
This is Jarvis. know how because of your character and your integrity, but I mean, can you just give us maybe kind of a timeline?
Well, starting with the esteemed gentleman to my left, Sylvestre. He and I used to be in the same tax bracket back in the day. Word. Word, right. He and I used to work together at one of Darden restaurants, right now to the right. Yeah. Miss Klarisse, I know her through, as I said, I'm an alumni from Hudson Link. Shortly, about a week before I left, or a couple days before I left, Greene Correctional, Ms. Torriente took over as the academic coordinator for Emory Packard. Mr. Cumberbatch, I knew through my volunteer work through JustleadershipUSA, and Mr. Wagstaffe. When I first met this gentleman, I remember I left. I was transferred from Mount McGregor Correction. Mount McGregor Correction facility is now shut down, and the college program, Hudson Link, moved to Greene Correctional. So I came into the dorm and I asked. Well, I asked where I asked the other inmates where the West Indies I'm guys. I said where they said it's a brother all the way down there.
All the way down.
He's not here right now. He worked in the law library. He soon forward. So I went over to him when he came in, and the first thing he told me, he said, "Yo, brother, I'm up on a mission." The recruit.
So that's one more question for Mr. Jarvis. Prior to you having this event in your life that took you off the path, what were your goals and aspirations? Are they the same now as they were prior to this event?
Somewhat the same, but now similar to my brother. I'm on a mission. I was a 07, 08, or 07 spring 08. I transferred to QEDC, and I was then I double majored in Africana and History, minor in political science. And then I left school for a little bit, and I found myself in Rikers, and then Mount McGregor and Greene. I was flirting with PhD programs before, so I already had academic stand once I was incarcerated. And I told my counselor, I said, get me somewhere where they have me in this college, and they got me to Mount McGregor, fortunately. So back then I was just PhD in history, but it's not as, it wasn't as serious as it is now. Now, in the fall of 2017, I'll be going to law school. I graduated in June with being Africana. I dropped it because I'm just trying to get this thing, get this show on the road. And I'll be taking what is called a gap year, just like what's her name, Ronald? Yeah. So I'm in good company.
She's in good company.
My man. You no longer my main man.
Yeah, until we leave every night, so you be all right. You be all right.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at, and I'm big on advocacy. I'm still a historian. I'm doing some work on the history of Klarisse, my hometown, back from Klarisse. So yes, those are my aspirations.
Okay, great. I want to just pause for the cause right now. We have some luminaries up here. I want to open up for questions, but you have to keep them brief because thankfully we have a room full of people. Floyd packed it out with NAACP and Sociology and Africana Studies, so everybody is in the room tonight. So if there are any questions, I would hope I would ask you to direct them to the particular panelists and, you know, keep your questions brief so that they can get their responses as thorough as possible. Can you work with that? Yes, sir.
I know we was just talking about your brother. I'd like to ask my brother here, like, how do you deal with the post-traumatic trauma since you did?
Well, I mean, one of the things I do over the years, even when I was in the system, I tend to read a lot of inspirational books and all these things. I always, try to do things to, not only to occupy my time, but just to do something that is constructive and will be beneficial to other people. Like, I currently volunteer in Habitat for Humanity in Alabama, where they build affordable houses for low-income families. So I go there every day and I go and volunteer helping to build houses. So I mean, do I have some issues with prison, having been there all these years? Like, I mean, I still have to wake up early in the morning. Doesn't matter how late I go to bed, I still wake up 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. So it's like I've been programmed in that sense. So this is something that you don't just outlive, you have to undo it, because I just recently came home in like a year and 5 months now. And it just like it has been a process all these years, you have been processed into that system, you have to undo it like gradually. And sometimes, yes, I do have a little, you know, hip bumps here and there, but it does not to the sense where it affect me like psychologically or anything like that. I always have positive support. I'm always strong mentally and stuff like that, so it doesn't really affect me as it would do other people. You know.
If I can just add to that real quick. We give a big shout out to this brother right here. He's like, his strength is like clearly amazing, right? But I also want I don't want it to get lost on the fact that this brother's position and his mentality is not the norm. Right? Because it's so easily to exceptionalize people and then say, well, if Everton can do it, then what you complaining about? When the reality is that, prison is a very traumatic situation. Right? There's no prison that is designed to acknowledge and maintain your humanity. So imagine from the time you come in the door, everything about you is stripped away. I mean, when you enter into the correctional system in New York State, you were in New York State, right? So when you enter into the correctional system in New York State, one of the first things they do is they shave all of your hair off. So, like, think about that. What you identify as who you are as a person, the characteristics that you have, they take that from you completely. Beard, everything, bald. Then, they take away all your clothes. They give you what they call state-issued property, because in the end, now you're state property. And then, even more dehumanizing is that they take your name from you, and they give you a department identification number. And this will be the number that you will be using to identify almost every aspect of your incarceration. So no longer will your name be Khalil, your name is now 0480961. So, think about that when you're actually kicked out of the door. And we're not even talking about stuff like solitary confinement. We're not even talking about stuff like being physically assaulted by correctional staff. We're not talking about any of that. Say you just survived prison and you leave. No one is checking on you to ask you, how are you coping? Because I remember when I first came home, the sound of keys. Like, think about that. The common sound of keys is something that would remind me of prison. Because in prison, the only person that carries keys is someone with some type of authority. Either a correctional staff or a counselor or someone else. So think about that. Like, think about how little that may seem to someone who never had that experience, but now that you have lived this, now it actually is something that triggers you. The sound of horns. I remember for a while it used to just drive me crazy. You never hear that when you're in the mountains. And then, of course, not having access, because a lot of people don't have access to someone who may be sympathetic to your situation. Most people come home and their family goes through like a honeymoon phase. Really happy to have you home, Khalil. Oh my God, we miss you. Really happy. And then after a while, 30 days, 45 days, like, when you gonna get a job? When you gonna start, like, manning up? When you gonna suck it up? Get over it. Oh well, time, it happened, so what? I remember one of my aunts, God bless her heart, loved me to death. She meant this with all sincerity and genuineness. She told me, she said, why don't you just forget about that? Like, that's just like over. Like, auntie, like, I love you to death, but no, that's not how it works. And it's like two women who have conceived and carried children. That a man he could be the best doctor in delivering babies in the world. He could have delivered 10 million babies. But it's something different when you know what it feels like to actually live that experience. So when a woman tells another woman, I'm in my second trimester, there's certain things that they don't have to say. They just know. I know what that feels like. Your back is probably feeling like this, your feet are hurt. All of these things that come with that. Whereas a man's just like, oh, she's in, what does that mean, like the 120th day? Right? Like, we don't have context for that. And that's the best example that I can give because it's real. So when someone asks us like how you cope with trauma, the reality is that it's a benefit to have support, like Everton said, but many people don't have that. And if they do have it, it lasts for a while, and then they're like, you know what? Oh well. So what you did 23 years, man, suck it up. You're out. Congratulations, really great. Oh, by the way, do you want to tell your story, trauma pending?
I can say something really quick, sorry. To piggyback off that, a little bit of homework. Look at this, go around and look at like the Scandinavian model of prisons. Compare it to the US model. You'll learn so much of the differences that other progressive countries around the world, how they treat their incarcerated, how they treat people who have broken the law or whatnot.
But that's just like the police system too, though. No?
Exactly. No, exactly. It gives you a good frame of mind to think about how other countries are supporting their incarcerated populations or whatnot, or policing, or just criminal justice systems compared to. We get bogged down in America. We think we're so great. We're so good. I mean, maybe not everybody in this room is studying sociology or whatnot. You guys might be a little bit more attuned, but it's always good to compare. Have that frame of mind.
My question is in relation to the families of those incarcerated, because when I think about cousins, friends, family members who were incarcerated, of course, it's the actual experience of being incarcerated, but I also think about the mothers, for example, who in some cases might literally die or feel like their life has been destroyed by the incarceration of the son or daughter who their whole life was given to them in terms of an investment to see them grow and prosper. So what is the collateral advantage, not just for the incarcerated, but also the entire community, especially mothers?
I was downstairs cooking, and they called me on the phone. Said Floyd Jarvis, chaplain wants to see me. The chaplain said, "You Floyd," he didn't look me in the eye. I'm like, am I in trouble? Like, no, what's going on? Went to the office, got on the phone. He said, Floyd's my sister. Hey, and I'm like, this is weird. Gave me the phone. She gave me bad news that my mother passed away. And that was August 9th, 2014. And that was heavy for me. And I was fortunate enough to go down to the funeral. And some brothers aren't that fortunate. They won't allow you to go at all. And but nobody can tell me that my incarceration wasn't heavy on my mother, like heavy on her heart. Although she was dealing with other issues, that has always stuck with me. And so
So first, I want to just acknowledge that there are organizations that actually do this, do that work. I mean, like Families Against Mandatory Minimums, like probably be at the forefront of that movement, particularly as it involves like around mandatory minimums. So at Just Leadership USA, when we talk about those directly impacted, we talk about specifically those who have went through the criminal justice system, who have first-hand experience, but we also are talking about families and communities who are also impacted. We're not going to have any type of real systemic change until we actively include those people in the conversations. I mean, if you look at any social justice movement in history, it had not reached that tipping point. It had not reached that locomotive momentum until it had the voices of those directly impacted, including family members and community members. Right? If you look at civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ, HIV and AIDS, they were all led by people who were impacted by some shape, form, or fashion. And then, of course, you had supporters, people who were not impacted by the issue in any way, but just as a human being said that that's just wrong. So, again, when we think about how do we continue to build this momentum to the point where it's like a locomotive towards decarceration, is that we have to be including those voices. So anytime you have a conversation with people like, what about those voices? It's really good to have those conversations when you don't see people who are directly impacted talking about the issue. Right? It would be unfathomable to talk about women's reproductive rights without women involved in the conversation. Like it would be unfathomable, and the blowback would be crazy. Same thing with LGBTQ. But yet when it comes to mass incarceration, it's perfectly fine for a multi-million-dollar organization to get a bunch of money and not even ask the family members how they feel about this. What do you think would be a good solution, right? And in many ways, if you think about it, it's insulting. And more importantly, it's only going to get us a Band-Aid fix. It's not going to get us true systemic change, as Michelle Alexander talks about in her book. We're only going to be tinkering around the edges. And we'll be back at the table having more conferences, more panels in another 20 years.
My question is, you were talking about how much it costs per inmate per bed. Now, in those 3 years that Khalil was in prison, those 13 times he was transported back and forth, Rikers should be shut down. But what role does the criminal justice system, like the courts themselves, play in this sick, twisted game when you have someone that's already chained up, who has to be chained up again, walk through a pen, held in a holding cell, then transported in a bus? Mind you, this is all the while, like you have to understand that this is not like, oh yeah, let me just handcuff you. You can be a big man and be chained up, the waist, the hands, the feet, and you're shackled there for 6 hours for a judge to tell you, take them back. And then that's another 3 hours on the road and another 6 hours. So what about that? What about all the money and all the resources that are being wasted by people that know damn well these people don't have dates coming up? What's that game? Like, how do you shut down a place like Rikers when judges and lawyers are benefiting from that? They watch it happen every day. Like, I feel like there's a huge responsibility on the people on the inside. An inmate cannot fight for his right to say, well, I can't go to court tomorrow, or maybe we should rearrange that. So who's responsible on the other side for all this? Because they're blaming inmates for this abundance of money that comes out of taxpayers' pockets, but really where that money is going to is to fund these people that do nothing all day but transport these people back and forth like cattle. I mean, that's where the money really goes, because it's not. What does it cost to have a bunk in an empty cell?
So
that does not cost $200,000 a year.
So the $167,000 per bed per year is a number that is not factoring in transportation costs, overtime costs, pension, health care for the correctional staff. Now, when you do factor all of that in, because if anyone has been on Rikers Island, you already know that if you go to court, you have a 9 a.m. court appearance, and you're done by 10:30, whatever the outcome was, whether they adjourned it or whatever, you know you're not going back to Rikers Island until 6, 7 o'clock. The correctional officers purposefully milk the clock and milk overtime that comes out of taxpayer dollars, right? So yes, like, and I'm not saying that the correctional union or correctional staff are the major hurdle in the way. Let me say that again. They are not actually the major hurdle in the way. It's very easy to feed into that, like the us versus them mentality. But the reality is that there's many players involved. It's the Office of Court Administration, it's the judges, it's the district attorneys, all the way from the head district attorney all the way down to the ADAs. It's defense sometimes. I mean, not necessarily the brother here, but we all know that there are many different factors that come into play. And just because someone says that they're there to represent you doesn't mean that they're there to represent you. I mean, that's just a fact, right? I mean, how many private lawyers we've now seen get disbarred because of some crazy behavior, right? And then of course, yes, it is of course, when you're on Rikers Island and you're frustrated and you don't have any programs, you don't have anything to do, and the culture is already violence, it's not far-fetched that a person's behavior is going to be more violence because you're frustrated, right? People are charging you for something that you didn't do. You believe as a human being that the system is going to, that the system is ultimately going to vindicate me, but we know for a fact that for every one Everton, there's probably 15 other people who have languished or ultimately are still serving time for something that they didn't do. So yeah, all of that has to be taken into account. There's multiple players. But I will say that the ultimate person who can actually close Rikers Island, like literally if he wanted to do it, he could do it, is Mayor de Blasio. That if he actually wanted to close Rikers Island, he could do it. He does not need legislation, he does not need any approval from the state. He can literally put steps into place, enforce them, bring the population down low enough, and just literally close the facility. And more importantly, a more concrete action step is that he should be removing all youth and women from Rikers Island, like right now, immediately. And he could do that today if he wanted to. But as someone who touts himself as the most progressive mayor in the country, let alone the world, we have to hold him accountable, right? I mean, it was said multiple times, and that cannot be lost in the conversation either. And not necessarily always in voting, but we have city council members. There's 52 city council members. Find out who your city council member. Ask them what their stance is on Rikers Island, because a lot of them have yet to take a public position on what we're going to do at Rikers Island. And if they say something like, well, we're kind of still, no, that's not acceptable to me. I'm sorry, it's not. You just asked for a raise. Tell me what you're doing. So we also have to do that too.
So one of the biggest issues we face in the court as a criminal defense lawyer is the law itself, right? So the law as it currently is allows a prosecutor to say, I'm ready for trial on this day. Let's have a trial date this day. The defense will show up, shine, ready to go to trial with their client. And guess what? People are not ready. People request a week. But it would be impossible to adjourn cases, based on the prosecutor's specific request. So the case gets adjourned for a month. What happens in that month? You think you're going to go to trial? Get your client ready for trial, get your witnesses, you get your evidence. What happens? People not ready. People request 3 days. The way, people don't realize, but the way speedy trial works is so important. It's like a football game, right? A football game is supposed to be, let's say, 60 minutes. Have you ever seen a 60-minute football game? It's impossible. There's timeouts, there's injury, timeouts. There's, penalties, there's this, there's that. So, what I'm saying? Everything. So what ends up happening is, for example, in a misdemeanor in New York, the people have 90 days to be ready for trial. Never have we ever see a case be done with in 90 days unless you have a complaint witness who's just not cooperative, right? So essentially what will happen is, out of that 90-day clock, people will request 1 week, that's 7 days, but the case gets adjourned for 30 days. Again, people not ready. Then they request 2 days. So now you only lost 9 days, but it's been 2 months. So what needs to happen more than anything else is reform. There needs to be an outside organization to monitor if the people are actually ready for trial. If Because sometimes what happens too is they'll say they're ready for trial, they don't have witnesses, but there's no accountability, there's no one to actually check. We're depending on a prosecutor's word to say, yeah, I have witnesses, they're in the back. Another problem also that causes delays, right? And why people don't get to go to trial, you know, when they should, is because there are a lack of court parts. You would never believe the amount of times, I think of one particular client, he was charged with resisting arrest, and the basis for the arrest, because it needs to be a basis, was completely BS. He wanted to fight the case and we were ready to go. We had videos, surveillance, we had video, we had everything to go, ready to go. In that case, we had a prosecutor who actually wanted to try the case, because most of them, they didn't want to go to trial. But what happened is, people answered ready, the defense answered ready, no trial parts. Why are there no trial parts? If both sides are actually ready at the same time, same day, why are there no trial parts? A trial part is where you go to trial, a trial courtroom. A judge, who's ready to get a case to trial. And the amount of time in that particular case, we might have both answered ready, myself and the prosecutor, probably answered ready for trial something like 10 times. No trial. And justice delayed is justice denied, right? So that is the number one thing. I think that needs to be reformed as far as the amount of time it takes for a case to get to trial and accountability for prosecutors who are defeating the system because there's no accountability. There's no one that says, well, how do we know they actually have witnesses there? How do we know they actually need a week to be ready for trial? Who says that 2-day request for time isn't illusory? It's just BS. It's just a number that's out of their hat. We don't know. The judges accept it blindly, and our clients suffer because of it.
Peace, y'all. I want to preface this by saying that power is in the hands of the people. We collectively band together. We can enact change, the necessary changes. Brother was talking about earlier about the crime bill, and it's necessary to understand that behind these crime bills are powerful lobbyists. And y'all also talked about key players. One thing I wanted to highlight, which y'all probably not aware of, is with respect to the players in this, is institutions that are powerful players within the criminal prison industrial complex. And so just wanted, if y'all could, discuss this a little bit, talk about institutions such as the CUNY institution, which are invested in the prison industrial complex. If y'all can speak on this a little bit, because it's kind of like disturbing for me sometimes. Like I'm here, I'm a student, and programs such as Be on the Mind they created, which are great, which bring brothers together and sisters for various reasons. But at the same time, it seems hypocritical that you have an institution, a system that is invested in the prison industrial system, and at the same time, it's talking about liberating people of color.
Google CUNY divest. Google CUNY divest. Now, divestment is, I'm no economics or finance business. You invest stock into a company, into an organization, and there are organizations that are invested in the mass incarceration of persons. Okay? There are corporations and organizations of persons that are invested in the mass incarceration of persons. So, for example, I believe Colombia divested from these organizations. They took away their money, their investment from these organizations. So, whatever institution you're in, check out your 401ks and pensions. See exactly where they're going, if you care. If you don't care, then just keep trucking along. But if you do care, check it out and see actually where your money is going to these. If your money is actively invested by the city and working or whatever, it's actually invested in the mass incarceration of persons. Okay.
So yeah, that was the example that I was going to use about divestment, is that Columbia University divested from any company that actually represents mass incarceration or benefits from mass incarceration. And I say that very specifically because although there are private companies like GEO Group and CCA, Correctional Corporation of America, that there are also companies that are like subsidiaries of them, right? And we all know, like, if you know anything about business, right, is that if you get a bad name, you just change your name, period, right? So companies create subsidiaries with different names that are really underneath an umbrella of the larger company. But many people don't do that. It's a little more difficult to make that link, and most people think like, well, this is just a good company, right? So yeah, but then I would also say that Columbia, the Board of Trustees didn't one day wake up and say, oh my God, we are randomly investing in mass incarceration. And that is so appalling, we must stop it. No, the student body said that this is going to happen, or you're going to have us in front of your door every day, and we are relentless. Yeah, so we talk about stakeholders in the movement. College students have always historically been involved heavily in any social justice movement. And it's not uncommon because you're at a point in your life where you're trained to critically analyze information. So when someone says to you, yes, we're investing in this company, you're like, why? Why does that make sense? As a matter of fact, I got 80 other people asking me why, and I know how to organize them. So I would encourage you to do as is given to you as a right, as like a constitutional right, but also as a human being. Ask yourself, like, why do you want to benefit in any shape, form, or fashion from the misery of someone else? And then also too, I would think about not only when you ask entities to divest, but also ask them, like, what are they going to do to actually help repair some of the damage that comes from that? Because there are ways that they can invest in other companies that would also bring them, some type of marginal gain. But in the end, you're also helping to heal some of the trauma that actually comes with this thing called mass incarceration.
I think I could speak from here, if it's all right to speak. This is not exactly a question for the panel. It's more like testimony of that would go along maybe with the point of why we would be critiquing this whole mass incarceration system. In that a few years ago, I got a letter from Shawangunk Correctional Facility asking me to come and give a Black History Month talk. And the letter was like the most beautifully written letter I've ever seen in my life, with this beautiful stationery, Afrocentric stationery. And I assumed it was like maybe the cultural officer of the prison or something asking me to. So when I called and I said, can I speak to Mr. Robertson, please? They said, Robertson? You mean inmate? Is he an inmate? I said, I don't know. Is he an inmate? And sure enough, on the bottom was his number. Anyway, so I went up to Shawangunk Correctional Facility, the first time I've ever been in a maximum security prison, ever. And so then when it's time to give the Black History Month talk, and I go into the big room, all of these brothers in there that look just like everybody in the room right here. All of them, most of them from Brooklyn, but this was way upstate. And it was just, for me, just an example of how this system operates. To bring the brothers from down here in Brooklyn, take them up there. All of the people that worked at the prison were the local white folks who had good jobs at the prison, keeping these brothers locked down, intelligent, thoughtful, politically motivated, politically active, good writers, good thinkers, but they're up there. They're up there. They're up there. So that's all I wanted to say. That I'm
gonna make the best of this time. I'm gonna comment on everything. So the founder of our organization, Glenn Martin, says that we lock up our best and our brightest. And I remember talking to someone who ran a pretty successful drug business in the South Bronx, and the intricacy in which he ran his organization was like very disciplined and very structured. And later on I would learn, like, that this brother had so much talent when it came to business, and had his product been soda instead of Coke, he would have made money legitimately. And then I think about what we criminalize, right? I mean, if we were to think about this idea of conspiracy, and if we went down to Wall Street with that idea of conspiracy, you know, how many Wall Street brokers would we actually be locking up? And then I think about the fact that there are 7 neighborhoods in New York City, 5 boroughs, which are really 5 counties, an entire 64 county state of New York. So outside of New York, there are 59 counties. So in 7 neighborhoods in those 5 counties feeds almost 70% of the New York State prison system. And if I tell you neighborhoods, it's the same neighborhoods that are impacted by high rates of unemployment, high rates of STDs, teenage pregnancy, a ton of socioeconomic issues. Same environment that created what we call $million-dollar blocks, where governments invest millions of dollars in locking people up, and if you populate them on certain blocks, actually totals to millions of dollars. And those neighborhoods are South Bronx, South Jamaica, Flatbush, Bed-Stuy, East New York, right? Like, these are all neighborhoods, if you took the name off of it, and you didn't know what neighborhood you were looking at, they would all look the same. It's the same people, same environments that are overly policed. So it's not a coincidence, right? Like, yes, we have our best and our brightest, but we cannot be fooled to believe, like, well, that just means that people in these neighborhoods commit more crime. Because the reality is that's not the case. So just, you know, always want to place that in proper context, that, you know, we're not talking about a runaway train. You know, we're talking about a very well thought out, well planned, well funded, well thought out vehicle, that the 1994 crime bill was just like this moment where it became visible. But the reality is that there are many other 1994 crime bills before and after that. That was just something that we can now kind of, the last touch point, reach back to. But if you read Michelle Alexander's book, or if you read Khalil, the other Khalil Gibran Muhammad, they both laid out that this is a historically motivated and racialized system that has found ways to criminalize people of color. And now, actually, it's including people who don't have money, which are the poor, right? Because now you can be black, brown, or white, and in certain counties across this country, if you can't pay back your debt, you're being locked up. So it's not exclusively black and brown folk, but it is primarily black and brown folk.
Really quick, I just want to comment. I live, and the program that I run is in a rural town in upstate New York, and you have to take into consideration, when I'm lobbying, I'm often asked, because those communities that these prisons are mostly in, that's it, some of them. The prison is the sole resource of funding for that community. And I often, when I'm lobbying, will get the question, well, what are those people going to do? What are those people going to do? Exactly. But that is often, and it just perpetuates, and I know that we talked about not saying them versus us, but it just continually perpetuates that separation of, you know, brown and black sisters and brothers and men and women in these facilities. And then once you go further and further north, you know, there's such a big difference between, and I know some people can attest to this, to a facility like Bedford compared to Attica. There's a very different of staffing, the way that staff looks, how staff treats people, and whatnot. That dichotomy just, it has to end, and it's a very stressful work, and I can't say because I've not been incarcerated myself, but just to provide an educational service is tense.
I'd just like to add that, you know, we're talking about those of us that may be affected by, you know, the prison industrial complex. All of us are affected by the prison industrial complex. So, you know, because of, you know, the interconnectivity of everyone, we're all affected by it. You know, if you gave somebody $200,000, they wouldn't be a criminal. You know what I'm saying? They would be able to go to college and, you know, raise a family and have the things that they need, but because they take resources from us, you put people in situations, and poverty shows up the same wherever it shows up. So if it's Russia or wherever, if you take people's resources, they're gonna do the same thing. So we are not the poster children for, you know, for crime and dysfunction.
I also like to speak to that too. If you think there isn't as much cocaine on Wall Street as there is in East New York, you are severely mistaken. I mean, these people do drugs, they commit crime, but at the end of the day, NAACP is afraid of those folks. They are not afraid of us because they look at us as weak. They practice in New York policies called broken windows, right? And with broken windows, that theory of policing, you know, the theory is if we just crack down on minor offenses in these low-income neighborhoods, we can lower crime, right? So what that means is these police officers, they're required to harass people in these neighborhoods. They're ordered to make a certain amount of arrests, a certain amount of stops. And what happens is people get harassed. And of course, if you search everyone's pocket in East New York, you're gonna find some contraband, right? That's just life. But if you also search Wall Street, those folks have it too. There really needs to be some reform as far as the policing policies that keep us down. I mean, I'm from East New York, and you know, as an attorney, I'm stopped all the time. I'm walking around in a suit. You know, I'm driving a decent car, I hope. And you know, you'll get stopped for no reason. Hey, where you going tonight? Hey, do you have any money that you shouldn't have? It's not the communities, it's the system in place that allows or requires people, police officers, to harass the people in these communities. It really is.
Hi, I'm from Jamaica, Queens. Had to throw that out there. So my undergrad I did at John Jay, right? So it was forensic psychology. So I've extensively studied why people go to jail or why coercion, why that happens, and people can't believe that. Why would somebody, you know, say they did something they didn't do? Why would somebody cop a plea? My nephew is now incarcerated for the last 12 years. He was 19, and they took him back and forth, till he finally pleaded out 25 years. So now he's 31, 12 years in of the 25. And family members, myself, because I'm one of the ones who is rock, he has lost both parents, my sister and his father, while being in prison. So they dehumanize you. Figures of authority. You come, if you're assistant, you got a bunny here, you have pins, take the pins out. They will strip you, whether it's down to your weave or anything, your clothes. You know what, those pants look like they're too provocative. Take them off. They'll send you back downtown, down the hill, wherever that, because he's in Clinton now. So he's in one of the worst of the worst. And I reached out to Attorney General Eric Snyderman. I've sent letters to this one, that one, because he's like, all right, honestly, I'm in fear of my life. All right, that is really bad. And no return calls, no return letters. So it's like one thing, what is the family to do when they care about their family members? Because it's like a family member in prison, you don't do away with them. You go to them. You let people know they have people out here that will make noise, because I will. And being an undergrad in John Jay, I had the choice to go to Rikers. I said no. You know, I educate students now. I'm in Brooklyn, I teach high school. And it was a decision for me. I could have made more money. So what resonated with me or for me was in John Jay when I read the school to prison pipeline. Enough is what I told myself, because I have family members, most of them on the other side of the track. But they have rights. So what is the family to do when these rights are being broken? He's saying that his friends, you know, the inmates are being beaten almost half the inches of their lives. They can't speak. If I call the prison, then they might give him drama. Because it's a way that you have to go about it. So it's like, who do you speak to? What type of access do we have as civilians? Even though, like I said, when you go, they tell you when you go down the hill, it's about $10 for a bandana that costs $1 on Flatbush. It's about, and if you don't have the money, you just can't see your loved one. So they take him all the way up. He's been in Attica. You name him, he's been there. And I visited. Okay? And then they put him in solitary. Like, they do so much to make sure that you almost go crazy. You know? So it's like, when you pull up, you see the Harleys in front. Okay? You see the fancy cars. They're not ours. Okay? So this is a living. This is how they make their living. And that's what I try to tell my teenage boys in school. This is what it is. You have to look at yourself. Where are you today in current events? Look at yourself for who you are, know your place in this world, and rise up. So, I mean, my only question would be like, how do you get help?
So, thank you for sharing your story, like, very transparently. My youngest daughter is driving this woman crazy. It's hilarious. Speaking of families, I think you mentioned someone who's like a really good person to reach out to, which is Eric Schneiderman. I also think that, that's not the end all be all. I think that, the only way to expose injustice is to expose injustice, right? The only way to actually get it out is to actually tell your story. And so, like, if no one knows who Eric Schneiderman is, he's basically the Attorney General of New York State. He basically is a district attorney for any crimes that are committed in the state. So he can go after local politicians, he can go after state politicians, he can go after correctional officials, correctional staff in New York State prison system and in the city. So that's a good person. The other thing is like, who can you go to on a federal level? I mean, Preet Bharara has been pretty adamant about his focus on prisons, although he's like, limited in his district. But also you should be thinking federally about who you could be contacting. And I would urge you to think about making your grievance known to someone in the state correctional system, not with the hopes that something will change, but with the understanding that there could be some blowback. But in the end, you always want to do what they call, you want to exhaust all of the administrative remedies. You want to go through the process and say, well, I went to the sergeant on the visiting floor, nothing happened. Then I went to the depth of the facility, nothing happened. And then I went to the person in Albany, and nothing happened. And then I went to the AG. I mean, what do you want me to do? Like, I'm not going to sit here. And I'm not saying that in the end things are always, things are going to change, right? But at least there's a track record that you've documented. And then ultimately, right, again, it goes back to like holding our public officials responsible. So I would be finding out who the county executive is in Clinton and pulling their coat from the perspective of, look at all these bad correctional officers. No, it's more like, look, you're a public official. At some point you're gonna be reelected. How crazy would it be if it came out that there was a scandal in your county that you turned a blind eye to? I think that would be very bad that a local paper would actually find that extremely intriguing to write about, right? And I say that kind of like leading the conversation, saying like, well, I'm also implying that I would be reaching out to a local newspaper and exposing that. But in the end, it would be crazy if it did come out, right? I mean, if you think about what happened in Clinton where these two people escaped, and all of the negative attention that brought, some public officials got relieved of duty because of that, right? So that goes to show you the power of what some type of quote-unquote scandal can actually produce in terms of removing people. But in the end, right, again, we're tinkering around the edges. Even if you change the commission, even if you change the superintendent, the overall big picture is holding public officials accountable for systems like the Department of Corrections.
Great things going on. I was formerly incarcerated also, a couple of years, but when I was there, I always asked myself this question: what's the purpose of jail and prison? Because I always think it's a form of rehabilitation, to rehabilitate the one, two, come back into society. But I guess I was wrong. You know why? Went to hell. That's hell. I never went to hell in the street, but I went to hell there. Police pull up my locks, beat me up, bust my eye up, hospital, stitch up my face. Look, that's no rehabilitation. So I always ask the question. Maybe one of y'all could answer the question more accurately. I can't. And I guess since you're talking about the prison system, I'm a vegan, so when I was in the system, it was hard for me to eat food. Hard for me. When I was in confinement, and they trying to feed me anything, I swear, like days I'm eating that box. Days. So maybe if you're addressing some problems, there's a lot of vegans in there, don't eat no form of animal products. That's one of the issues that one of the 5 goals.
Well, I think you're right. Like, the purpose of prison is to punish you. Period.
Oh,
That-
let me say one more thing.
Yeah, we do.
Rehabilitation, right? One day up, a short story, precise. Then, discrimination because of my locks, discrimination because of my accent, discrimination because of my country, just because I'm Jamaican. What are you telling me, because you're Jamaican, I don't like you? Like, what type of thing is this? I mean, police put a knife on me, said, police come and search me. And take out the knife out of his pocket and say, it's you, it's yours. I say, yo, this man crazy. Yo.
Yeah, so, I mean, unfortunately, your story is not unique. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, it's like your story is totally not a one-off. Like, that is something that happens across the state and across the country. So it's not just New York State, but it also happens all across the country. But in terms of your direct question, the prison system that we know it now, the prison system, not necessarily programs that come in, the prison system is designed to further inflict punishment onto you and in the process dehumanize you. And they can use all the rhetoric that they want to, because if anyone has ever read the mission statement for the Department of Corrections and Community Services, it's like, wow, that's like really impressive. But the reality is that words are different than actions. The reality is that violence and abuse and neglect play out on a daily basis. Now, I think the question that begs to be asked is, what should be the purpose of any form of incarceration? Not necessarily a prison, because people could face some type of supervision and not necessarily be in prison, right? For instance, like ankle bracelets, right? Like ankle bracelets are a way to expand the net of community supervision, but not necessarily put a person in prison, although it incurs the same cost in many cases. So I think what the question should be asked is, why is it so hard for us as a country to reimagine what it is to actually hold someone accountable, not punish them? Think about that. Like, holding someone accountable is completely different than punishing them. And I look at my 2 daughters, right? And like, holding them accountable for their behavior is different than punishing them. Letting them know that what they're doing is not appropriate, but not at the same time, not like flogging them, right? Like, there's a difference between accountability and punishment. But every time we try to reimagine a jail system, it inevitably goes down to punitive. Like, yeah, but you're right. We should be reforming the system for non-violent drug offenders, but not the people with violent cases. And that comes from community members sometimes. That doesn't necessarily come from people on the quote-unquote other side. But what I would say is that in terms of how I reached any form of rehabilitation, did not come from the New York State Department of Corrections. That came from volunteer programs like Hudson Link, like VPI, like Alternatives to Violence Project, like other organizations coming into the prison system offering services. So any form of rehabilitation, as like Everton kind of laid, kind of like paved the way for that, and then Floyd mentioned it, is like self-rehabilitation, right? This idea that I have the ability to learn, and I want to learn, and I want to better myself. I'm going to get a job in a law library. But the reality is that, again, Everton's example is like very much the exception. Like, for every Everton, there's like 10 or 15 other people who are just going to do their time, who are just going to give up and say, you know what, damn all that, you're right, I'm just going to cop out and take this 25-year sentence, and I'm just going to do it, I'm going to do it quietly. When the reality is that if we are holding someone accountable, and we're giving them 25 years, when they leave that prison system, They should be able to transition into society as natural as possible. And the big picture on that is relieving the stigma and the shame that comes with incarceration. I mean, when you think about it, for all intents and purposes, Martha Stewart is someone who's formerly incarcerated. But when you think formerly incarcerated, you don't think Martha Stewart, right? Or Plaxico Burgess. You don't think about people like that, with like this high status, right? But when we start seeing more and more of that, is when people will start to say, wait a minute, maybe we are. And if you look at the heroin epidemic, is a clear example of that. Heroin has been ravishing communities of color for decades, and all of a sudden it ran face up into white middle class suburbia, and in some cases upper class, and all of a sudden it became a heroin epidemic. And it's a disease, and more importantly, they're no longer being punitive about it.
No, that's the difference.
Police officers are being trained on how to give you a cure immediately, right? So all of that comes because this perception of who is impacted actually changed. And if you look at, again, another example, the HIV and AIDS movement, when people started to realize that it was more than men who had sex with men, that it was actually women, it was actually children, it was actually people, like who are just getting blood transfusions. That's when they said, wait a minute, it just can't be this. Now it's an epidemic, and now we're going to throw tons of money behind it. We're going to change the way that we view that. Now if someone says they're HIV positive, it's not like, whoa, wait a minute, get away from me. We need to reach that point with people who are formerly incarcerated. And the only way we can do that is if we ourselves can reimagine what it is to hold someone accountable and have a system that can do that. So yes, if someone did take someone's life, how do we hold them accountable? Give them what they need. Or if someone stole a purse, how do we hold them accountable and give them what they need?
And that, folks, it was almost the last word. We got 2 seconds left, so we got half a second. Yes.
Hi everyone, I work with Khalil, and I see a lot of young faces here, and I'd just like to put in a quick announcement. If you're young, if you're personally affected by the system, or if you're just interested in this stuff, feel free to come and talk to Khalil or myself. We're kicking off this amazing campaign. There's been 2 previous attempts to close Rikers. Both of them have failed because we haven't involved the community. Well, not me, I was not a part of that. It happened in the 1980s, before I was born. But I'm excited to join the team. Khalil's been an amazing person to work with, and there's a lot of momentum behind it. We want to get the community involved. We'll train you in organizing. Super exciting. Feel free to come talk to us.
We are at 9 o'clock. We are on time, and I want to thank the panelists. Please thank the panelists. I want to thank Floyd, Jarvis for putting this together. And this is what he's going to do. At some point, when he graduates, he's going to come back and do another panel. So if you'd like to get some autographs, you can come up and get some autographs. Thank you.
I just be doing emails like all the time.
Once he gets any forgiveness,